The evidentiary hearing session is called to order this Tuesday, October 19th, 2021 at 2 p.m. My name is John Morissette, member and presiding officer of the Connecticut Siting Council. As everyone is aware, there is currently a statewide effort to prevent the spread of the coronavirus. This is why the council is holding this remote hearing, and we ask for your patience. If you haven't done so already, I ask that everyone please mute their audios on their computer and telephones now. A copy of the prepared agenda is available on the council's docket number 502 webpage, along with the record of this matter, the public hearing notice, instructions for public access to this remote public hearing, and the council's Citizens Guide to Siting Council's procedures. Other members of the council are Mr. Ed Edelson, Mr. Silvestri, Mr. Nguyen, Ms. Cooley, Mr. Lynch, Executive Director Melanie Bachman, Staff Analyst Robert Mercier, and Financial Administrative Officer Lisa Fontaine. This evidentiary session is a continuation of the remote public hearing held on July 13th, 2021, August 31st, 2021, and September 21st, 2021. It is held pursuant to the provisions of Title 16 of the Connecticut General Statutes and of the Uniform Administrative Procedure Act upon an application from Selco Partnership, DBA Verizon Wireless, for a certificate of environmental compatibility and public need for the construction, maintenance, and operation of a telecommunications facility located at 118 Newton Road, Woodbridge, Connecticut. Please be advised that the council's project evaluation criteria under the statute does not include consideration of property values. A verbatim transcript will be made available of this hearing and deposited with the Woodbridge Town Clerk's office for the convenience of the public. The council will take a 10 to 15 minute break at a convenient juncture around 3:30 p.m. Item 1B on the agenda, we have a motion. On October 12, 2021, Wennett submitted a motion to dismiss failure of mandatory notice. Attorney Bachman may wish to comment.
Thank you, Mr. Morissette. Wennett's motion to dismiss claims the applicant failed to provide adequate notice of the public hearing under regulations of Connecticut State Agency Section 1650J21, which requires an applicant to post a sign along a public road at or in the vicinity of where the proposed facility would be located at least 10 days prior to the public hearing. The sign shall set forth the name of the applicant, the type of facility, the remote public hearing date, and contact information for the council. The council created the sign requirement in its 2012 regulations revisions proceeding. It does not require the instructions for participation in the public hearing to be included on the sign. Applicant's July 9th sign posting affidavit indicates that signs were posted along Newton Road and Soundview Drive less than 10 days in advance of the public hearing. During the August 31st evidentiary hearing session, Attorney Baldwin stipulated that the sign was posted on July 7th. Wennett alleges this is a material omission because the instructions for participation in the public hearing notice required any person to submit a request by July 6th. In the case of Mobley versus Metro Mobile CTS Incorporated 216 Con 1, abutting property owners to an approved tower site appealed the council's decision, alleging a lack of notice of the filing of the application with the council under General Statute Section 1650L, subsection B. The Supreme Court held, quote, "The purpose of constitutional notice is to advise all affected parties of their opportunity to be heard and to be apprised of the relief sought. That required notice, however, applies to notice of the hearing. It does not extend a notice of a pre-hearing application. Close quote. Nor does it extend to notice by sign posting. Consistent with the council's holding, the court's holding in the case, and the requirements under Council Statute 1650M, notice of the hearing was published in the New Haven Register on June 10th, 2021 in 10-point bold-face font. Therefore, the constitutional notice requirements for this matter have been met. Furthermore, Gwinnett is not prejudiced by the applicant's late sign posting and does not have standing to raise notice issues on behalf of third parties. Therefore, Gwinnett's motion to dismiss should be denied. Thank you.
Thank you, Attorney Bachman. Is there a motion?
This is Ed Edelson. I make a motion to deny Gwinnett's motion to dismiss the application.
Thank you, Mr. Edelson. Is there a second?
This is Mrs. Cooley. I would second Mr. Edelson's motion to deny.
Thank you, Mrs. Cooley. We have a motion by Mr. Edelson and a second by Ms. Cooley to deny the motion to dismiss for failure of mandatory notice. Is there any discussion, starting with Mr. Edelson?
No, I don't think I have any discussion. I think Attorney Bachman's explanation was clear and concise. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Edelson. Mr. Silvestri, any discussion?
No discussion, Mr. Morissette. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Silvestri. Mr. Nguyen, any discussion?
No discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nguyen. Mrs. Cooley, any discussion?
I have no discussion, Mr. Morissette. Thank you.
Thank you. And Mr. Lynch, any discussion?
Negative on discussion.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. And I have no discussion as well. We'll now move to the vote. Mr. Edelson, how do you vote?
I vote in favor of the motion, which is to deny the petition or the petition by Gwinnett.
Thank you, Mr. Edelson. Mr. Silvestri, how do you vote?
I vote in favor of the motion to deny. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Silvestri. Mr. Nguyen, how do you vote? Mr. Nguyen?
I apologize. I was on mute. I vote to deny the motion to dismiss.
You're voting against the motion?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Nguyen. Ms. Cooley, how do you vote?
I vote in favor of the motion to dismiss. Thank you.
Thank
The
you.
motion to deny the motion to dismiss. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Lynch, how do you vote?
Vote in favor of the motion to deny.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. And I also vote in favor of the motion to deny. We have 5 approving the motion to deny or the motion to dismiss, and we have 1 against. Motion passes to deny the motion to dismiss. Thank you. Moving on to item Roman numeral 2 on the agenda. Continued appearance by the applicant. In accordance with the council's September 22nd, 2021 continuation of the evidentiary hearing memo, we will commence and conclude with the continued cross-examination of the applicant on its late filed exhibits. We will begin with cross-examination of the applicant by the group party / intervener and SEPA interveners, Gwinnett, Mark and Michelle Greengard, and Oshner Place LLC. We'll start with Attorney Ainsworth. Attorney Ainsworth, good afternoon.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. So I'd like to begin with, I guess, posing some questions, but I'd like to establish a couple of terminologies. I'll refer to 118 Newton Road as Newton, and the Meetinghouse, 4 Meetinghouse and 50 Meetinghouse as a single entity, since they're right next to each other. So I have a couple of questions for Mr. Chiban about the coverage and the Meetinghouse alternatives. In the application submitted to the council, page 7, which is exhibit 2B1, Verizon said that reliable service is the goal that they are seeking to achieve, and that goal was equal to -95 dBm. Is that correct?
I'll have to pull up that. Can you tell me the exhibit number again and the page?
Yes, it's 2B1 and it's page 7. And for the council's benefit, if you would like, I can share screen. I have these all in the form of a PowerPoint slide, if that would make it easier.
Thank you, Attorney Ainsworth. We don't have the capability of doing that, and we're not going to start at this point. Thank you.
That is correct. Our propagation plots at neg 95 is what the objective is.
And that's what you would consider reliable service.
That is correct.
And also at that same location in the application, you were looking at wireless service deficiency that existed in particular on portions of Route 63, Route 67, Route 114, and in the area surrounding the property, which in this case would be Newton Road. Is that also true?
Yes.
Okay. And it also included Amity Regional High School and Alice Newton Memorial Park, correct?
I would have to check if that's what we put in that exhibit. I can quote from 2B1 page 7, but in there it appears that it says these wireless service deficiencies exist particularly along portions of Route 63, Route 67, Route 114 in the area surrounding the property, which I assume is Newton Road, and including Amity Regional High School parcel and the Alice Newton Memorial Park. Do you have any issue with that representation, that's what was in the application? No, it is correct.
Did you contribute to write the description of the objections in the application?
Yes, I did.
And so I assume then you would agree with the statements that you made when you wrote that, correct?
That is correct.
The original application doesn't say anything about a need for -105 dBm coverage, does it?
I don't know. I mean, I'd need to review that entire application to be able to answer.
Well, let's talk about the color code on Verizon's coverage maps. And I'm going to refer to the technical report bulk item. That's 2B1 small a. That's the exhibit number. And the application attachment is 2B1, application attachment 6. And your September 14th late files, attachments 2 and 3. That's 2B11.
Could I get a clarification, Mr. Ainsworth? You said 2B1A?
2B1 small parent A.
Is that the technical report that was filed with the town?
Yes, it is.
Okay.
I was trying to be exact.
No, appreciate that.
So the three documents each have references to the color coding for the coverage maps, and I just wanted to be able to address those. On those coverage maps,
The coverage greater than or equal to negative 95 is the green and the blue areas, correct?
That is correct.
And so blue and green are both more than or greater than negative 95. Is that correct?
They're neg 95 or better, yes.
And your 700 megahertz existing coverage maps show that the area around the proposed facility and going up Route 63 and Route 67 already has negative 105 coverage in yellow.
I apologize. I need to find the exact plot that you are referring to.
We're still talking about the plots in the technical report. Is that correct?
Yes, and the application B1 and attachment 6 also would have the existing 700 megahertz covered.
Okay, can you repeat the question?
Sure. Your existing coverage at 700 megahertz, the area around the proposed facility at Newton Road and going up Route 63 and 67 shows a negative 105 dBm coverage, and that's the yellow area on those maps, correct?
That is correct, yes.
So the technical report and the application coverage maps are consistent with the application's stated goal of negative 95 dBm or better, because they show that there's negative 105 dBm service already available almost everywhere in Woodbridge, correct?
That is what the maps show, yes. For 700 megahertz only.
Yeah. And if we're talking about PCS frequencies, that would be a subset of the greater coverage covered by 700 megahertz. In other words, it would be a smaller portion of the area, would it not?
It would be a much smaller portion.
Right. So for the other frequencies other than 700 megahertz, wherever you put this tower, the PCS frequencies would be located in a smaller area around the proposed tower. Is that not true?
That is correct.
So no matter where the tower ends up, the PCS frequencies will end up in that area on a smaller footprint than the 700.
That is correct.
Thank you. So looking at the coverage maps provided in attachment 6, that's 2B1 again. I see the logo as All Points on it. And is that All Points technology?
It has both the Verizon logo and the All Points technology logo. All
Okay.
Points assisted in formatting the maps, so that they are more presentable, let's say.
Did All Points generate the maps, or did Verizon generate the maps?
No, I generated the maps and sent the data to All Points, which then put it in this format that you see.
Thank you. That's helpful. Now, the legend on that map that we're referring to says blue is negative 85 dBm, and it's designated as in building. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes.
And green is negative 95 is vehicular.
Correct.
And the yellow is the outdoor coverage.
Correct.
All right. And so on July 13th, in the transcript at page 25, line 6, you confirmed that yellow was outdoor coverage and green was in vehicle. Did you not?
I don't have the transcript in front of me, but that is likely that I did that. Yes.
And so also on July 13th, you said a key objective, in addition to reaching inside buildings, was to get into vehicle. Is that also a Verizon objective?
Correct.
So since green is a negative 95 in vehicle coverage, that's a key objective of Verizon, is it not?
Yes.
So on August 31st, you seem to have testified that you said that yellow would cover inside a vehicle. And I'm referring to the transcript of August 31st on page 42. And if I can quote, it says, and as far as the color scheme, this is kind of the standard that we use at Verizon. So blue is, very good coverage. Green is good, and it would cover inside the house. And the yellow would provide coverage in a vehicle or to a vehicle inside a vehicle. Do you recall giving that testimony?
I do not. I'm gonna search for the transcripts. Hang on one second. Can you remind me the date of that hearing, of the transcript?
Yes, it would be August 31st in page 42. Lines 16 through 21.
August 31st.
Let's walk.
Can I have the page reference again, please?
Yes, page 2.
22?
42. 42.
42.
Okay, so this was referring to the actual drive test, not to the propagation plots.
And so the drive tests used different coverage, different colors.
I need a minute. Just give me 1 second. I'm looking at those plots.
Yeah, the drive test is 2B9. And if I'm reading it right, yellow is negative 95 to 105.
That is correct. However, there is a difference when looking at drive test versus looking at the propagation plots that are generated by the software that we use, in that there is a margin. There is something called a fade margin, which is basically accounts for the potential inaccuracy of the software model. And so that goes away when we actually do a measurement. So it basically the yellow on the drive test is indicates a better service than the yellow on the propagation plot. Even though the signal level is the same, there is no uncertainty in that one. It is an actual measurement.
Although in the drive test, the yellow is designated in the legend as neg 95 to neg 105.
That is correct. So there is a difference between a model and a measurement, in that the model needs to account for potential, uncertainties, which the measurement does not. So even though it's showing the same level, when you're looking at it on a drive test, it's actually it would actually cover inside a vehicle.
No. The legend doesn't say anything about what the yellow covers or what green covers or what the blue covers, correct?
You were asking about my testimony, the transcript, right? And
the question I was asking right now is that the legend doesn't say anything about what each of these colors covers. Is that a true statement or not?
The legend is giving a signal level in dBm.
And so there's no indication from that drive test document what any particular color achieves in terms of where it would penetrate.
That's correct.
So the only way that anyone could determine what might be the penetration level of any of these levels would be from the testimony that you gave.
That would, yeah, I guess that's true.
So during the CW test, where is the antenna mounted?
It's mounted on a crane.
At the top of the crane?
It's at the end of the boom of the crane, and the measurement device is mounted inside the vehicle.
Okay, and so on the vehicle end of it, the antenna is actually the receiving antenna, or the measuring antenna is on the car, correct?
Yes.
So looking at the drive test map for 750 megahertz, that's again 2B9, attachment 2. Can you see where the State Highway 63 and 67 intersect? They're almost exactly in the center of the map.
Yes, I do.
Okay. And north of that intersection, there's no green or blue on either 67 or 63, correct?
That is correct, but as I stated earlier, on the drive test, the yellow actually indicates a better level. It indicates the in-vehicle level, due to the fact that there is no uncertainty from the software modeling.
And so it's also, I guess, following up on what you just mentioned, the drive test, in your view, is more accurate than the coverage modeling that's done with the propagation software.
That is correct.
And for the alternative site at Meetinghouse, the only party that's produced a drive test is Winnet. Is that not correct?
That is true.
Now, all right, so when you look at the coverage map that was provided by Winnet for the drive test, does it not show that there is coverage in the area around Newton Road?
I apologize. I need a minute to pull up that drive test.
That's the September 14th.
While he's doing that, Mr. Morris said, I might just object. The Winnet drive test is something that Mr. Scheiban should not be asked to testify about. It's not our exhibit. It is Winnet's exhibit. Also, I'm hoping at some point this all ties back to the late file exhibits that you stated earlier was going to be the focus of this continued hearing. It's now 2:30, and I don't think we've touched on applicants' exhibits 10 or 11, which are the late file exhibits mentioned in the call.
Yes, thank you, Attorney Baldwin. Yes, this hearing is limited to the late file exhibits. I will allow a little bit of leeway, Attorney Ainsworth, but please circle back to the subject at hand, if you would, please. And I also agree that the witness is not going to be able to testify for somebody else's exhibit, but if your questions are in general in nature, please proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. The idea is I'm trying to compare and contrast them. So let me see if I can refocus. When you issued the SARF form, there were coverage objectives and areas that you'd like to reach at that time. And it appears that once you got to the application stage, that the objectives seem to have changed from the SARF form. Is there a reason why that happened?
First of all, I did not issue the SARF myself. It was done by the engineer that were previously working on this project. And the description in the SARF was very short. It didn't go into any details. The application went into more detail.
Now, there was some information about the, you testified last time regarding the late filed exhibits, which were the coverage maps for Meetinghouse Lane. And in the application, you had a list of sites that would interact with Woodbridge at page 9. Do you recall Verizon using that language of these are the sites that would interact with Woodbridge?
Yes, I do.
And the reason for that is just to determine whether explain to the council that here are the potential sources of existing coverage, correct?
It is something that we typically include in our application. I'm actually not, I cannot answer your question, but it is something that we typically do include.
Okay. And in the list of antennas that you disclosed, Ansonia, Beacon Falls, and Hamden 8 don't interact with Woodbridge, do they not?
I would again have to go and search for that. Wait, can you give me a page number?
That'd be application page 9, which was be 2B1, page 9.
All right, maybe in order to speed things up, I mean, if we did write something in the application, I guess you could just quote it and you don't have to question me whether we actually said it or not. It's in the public record.
Okay, I'll try to expedite then. Is it fair to say that a tower in Ansonia would not interact with Woodbridge, just given its geographical distance?
Not necessarily. No, I don't think that would necessarily be a true statement.
All right. So one of the things that you testified that there was a difference between the existing coverage and the technical report and the coverage maps in the application. And you said that was a result of new antennas being installed at the cell sites. Do I have that generally correct?
There were, so this is referring, if you're referring to the existing coverage, that is correct. As far as the proposed site, we dropped the height from 140 feet to 100 feet, excuse me, to 100 feet.
Right. So, and my question was with regard to the existing coverage. And so, all right. So, in your list of existing or the antennas that are installed on the sites within Woodbridge, isn't it true that the antenna model beginning with JAH8, excuse me, is the designation for a multiband antenna?
That is correct.
And on Hamden 8 and Sonia, the multiband antennas are designated with MX.
That is a different model of also multiband antenna.
But it's multiband, yes.
Correct.
And there are no other antennas listed on the list that you disclosed that show that there's multiband antennas, correct?
I'd have to go back and look at what I submitted. I'm sorry.
Which exhibit are we referring to now, Mr. Ainsworth?
Yes, this is 2B11, the late files, attachment 1, part 1.
So our exhibit 11, which is our September 14th late file response to the council's requests. Okay.
Correct, yes.
And this is attachment 1 of that exhibit, just to be sure.
I think it's labeled as attachment 1, part 1. Just antenna list or an antenna table. So, would you agree that there are no new existing site, or there's no existing sites with new multiband antennas other than in Sonia, Beacon Falls, and Hamden 8, correct?
I'm still looking for the attachment. Okay, can you rephrase the question? I have the attachment now.
That'll make it easier. Thank you. All right, so yes. So you see the list of antennas, and the only ones listed on that list that have multi-band antennas, or at least are listed with them, with those designations of JAHH and MX, are Ansonia, Beacon Falls, Hamden 8, and the Hamden Relo.
That is not correct. There's another kind that I show here, which is SBNHH, which also is a multiband antenna. And I believe there's another one which is called X7C. It starts with X7C.
And which sites are those designated as existing at? And I'm referring to the SBN HH and the X76.
I need just a minute.
No problem.
So I'm showing here Hamden 2 and Beacon Falls.
Okay. So Beacon Falls, does that interact with the proposed target area in Woodbridge? And by interact, I refer to that as providing existing coverage.
Not with the coverage objective area, but it does provide coverage as shown on the maps.
And to what portion of Woodbridge?
Again, not Woodbridge, but kind of the northwest portion of the maps that were submitted, the propagation maps.
And then you mentioned Hamden 2. And does Hamden 2 interact with the Woodbridge proposed coverage area?
No.
Okay. So of the antennas listed on the disclosed list of antennas, there are no multi-band antennas that would have provided background coverage that would have impacted the existing coverage modeling that was presented in the application and the subsequent modeling done for the alternate sites at Meetinghouse, correct?
That is not correct. Again, I mean, what I had explained is that we are continuously upgrading our network, and some of the antennas have changed. Some of the radio models have changed. We went from a vendor called Nokia to another vendor called Samsung. The radios have slightly different power levels. And what was provided in the late file exhibit is a point in time representation of what our network was on that day that we prepared the exhibit. It's not a historical, it does not show the history of each site and what antennas were there a few months ago.
Okay. Was it accurate as of September 14th?
It was.
And as far as the Hamden Relo site, there's a large ridge that intercedes between the Hamden Relo site and the area in Woodbridge where the coverage is being sought, correct?
I am, yes, that is correct.
And that large ridge would preclude it from providing any meaningful coverage or a contribution to coverage within Woodbridge, correct?
That is correct.
And I'm going through my notes here. Please bear with me. All right. And so with regard to the Meetinghouse lane alternatives, would you expect that they would be able to provide coverage to the high school and the Alice Newton Memorial Park?
I need a minute to pull up my coverage plot. Okay, so you're referring to the 15 Meetinghouse Lane alternate?
Yeah, 15 or 4, I guess they're close enough to each other. Would you expect actually any meaningful difference between 15 and 4?
The main difference was the height that they were modeled at. For Meetinghouse Lane, the existing monopole was modeled at 120 feet, and 15 Meetinghouse Lane was modeled at 140. The differences are slight, but to answer your earlier question, yes, they would cover the high school and the at least a good portion of the Alice Newton Memorial Park.
And when we say cover, we're talking at the objective level of the of -95. Correct.
That is correct, and that is for 700 megahertz, which is what was modeled on these plots.
And it would also cover Route 114 similarly?
That is correct.
Now, would you agree that there's a high volume of wireless traffic would come from an area that has things like a town hall, police department, fire department, church, ball fields, public park, DPW garage, senior center, public gym, high school, and a state road?
Yeah, I would agree.
And are you aware that all of those types of facilities exist within less than half a mile from the Meetinghouse Lane sites?
Yes, I am aware.
And now there's an existing radio tower at 4 Meetinghouse, is there not?
That is correct.
And isn't it one of Verizon's goals to try to share existing facilities before putting up new facilities?
It is.
And did Verizon explore the possibility of utilizing the existing structure to provide coverage to the objectives in the application?
This particular tower was not included in our search summary because it is too far from where our original objective was. But we did evaluate it as part of the response in the late file exhibit.
But yet the Meetinghouse locations would also provide coverage to the area around Newton Road, would it not?
Actually, I apologize. I think I may have answered incorrectly. Let me go back and look at the search site summary. It may have been included. I was just speaking from memory.
And that's fine.
Yeah, I misspoke earlier. So we did evaluate the public works garage on Meetinghouse Lane, which is near that 15 Meetinghouse Lane location. That was item number 6 on our site search summary.
And
so I don't think, we were not specifically asked to look at the existing tower, but we did look at the public works garage.
And so why didn't the existing tower come up on the radar screen, so to speak, given that it's an existing facility that might provide co-location opportunity?
As I mentioned earlier, it was way out of our search area. and we evaluated all the candidates that were submitted by the town and by some of the residents, and for some reason that was not one of them.
And so the coverage objectives in the original application included Alice Newton Memorial Park and Route 114 and Amity Regional High School, did it not?
That was included in our application, yes, and the description in the narrative of our application.
And the area surrounding 118 Newton, correct?
Correct, yes.
So the alternatives at Meetinghouse would actually meet those objectives for Route 114, Amity High School, and the Alice Newton Memorial Park, would they not? Even according to your coverage projection.
That is correct, but if you recall, the SARF mentions and the narrative in the application mentions routes 67 and 63.
But even with your existing or your proposed facility at 118 Newton, your projected coverage has some, is really only covered by what we see on that plot I was talking about earlier. That's 2B9, which has the yellow coverage.
You're referring to our CW drive test?
I am, yes.
Yes. So Route 63 is covered completely, and Route 67 is covered partially. There is a small gap on Route 67. Okay. And as I mentioned earlier, it's the yellow on the CW drive test indicates a better level than the yellow on the propagation maps, because there is no uncertainty as to that reading. There is no margin of error. It is an actual measurement.
And that didn't appear in your testimony before, but you did indicate that there was coverage for 63 and 67, but north of the intersection of 63 and 67, what we see is all yellow and black, correct?
That's correct. But as the transcript that you just referred to on page 42, I said that the yellow on the CW drive test represents in-vehicle coverage. So the yellow on the CW drive test is different from the yellow on the propagation map. So there is in-vehicle coverage on part of the 67 minus a small gap, and on a small portion of the 63 north of the intersection with the 67.
But there are black areas, and the black is really totally unacceptable to Verizon. It's not.
That is correct. Yes.
And so at some point, Verizon's going to need some sort of facility to the north of that intersection to cover perhaps what we might call Woodbridge North. Is that true?
So we have existing sites north of this proposed location, which is in Bethany, and that does cover the rest of the 63.
And what about 67?
So 67, there's also a site on that side. I need a minute to look up the name. Yeah, so we have a site that is called Woodbridge North, that it covers that kind of western part of the 67.
And does that extend down to the intersection of 63 and 67?
No, it does not.
So you'll still need some sort of infill to provide the target coverage that you are looking for to complete the coverage for 63 and 67, correct?
No, that is not correct. So the proposed facility at 118 Newton Road covers, the portion of the 67 minus a small area, which we're trying to put a small cell in to fill that gap. And then the rest will be covered by the site that is called Woodbridge North, which is an existing site. So this can be seen from the existing coverage propagation map.
So the proposed location at Newton Road is more than half a mile from Alice Newton Park and Route 114 and Meetinghouse Lane, where the high school is, correct?
It is more than half a mile from the 114. I don't know the exact distance to the high school.
And so isn't it true that the alternative at Meetinghouse would provide a fair amount of capacity where it's likely to be needed, such as the high demand high school area, the parks, the public works garage, the fire department, police department? Wouldn't that be a desirable goal for Verizon?
Can I ask for clarification? Are you assuming that site is built in addition to the proposed location or in lieu of the proposed location?
It's an alternative site. I'm not proposing that it be built in addition to.
Well, if you're asking a question about capacity relief, it's a different animal. So I'm just trying to understand whether we're talking about that site, the Meetinghouse Lane site, as a tower location that is considered together with what we've proposed in the application or in lieu of?
So, fair question.
So I'm just trying to frame out the question for Mr. Shiban, that's all.
Okay, yes. And perhaps I can clarify by asking a couple of other questions. One is the 2100 megahertz at 118 Newton Road will generally cover approximately around half mile around that location.
I need a minute to look at my plot. Okay, so that was also submitted in the CW drive test. There is the second page is the plot for the 2100 megahertz. And as you can see from that, it covers more than a mile in the southerly direction, but it covers less than a mile in the northerly direction. And then it covers also more than a mile in the eastern and western directions.
And would you expect a similar tower at the southerly end of that range to have the same projection to the north up to Newton Road?
Could you be more specific? The southerly end of what range are we talking about?
Of the 2100 megahertz. We were just talking, and I'll clarify. We were just talking about the potential 2100 megahertz PCS frequencies coming out of Newton Road. And you said they would project down a mile south or southerly from that location. Wouldn't it also be true that if you were at the end of that mile going south and you put in a facility there, that it would be able to reach a mile north with the PCS frequencies? Because you're talking about the same terrain. Okay,
first of all, just a point of clarification, 2100 is AWS and 1900 is PCS. But going to your question, it is not necessarily the case because that 118 Newton Road is kind of on significantly higher ground elevation than the existing tower at Meetinghouse Lane. So I would not assume that there's reciprocity between the coverage of these two.
If a signal can travel south over terrain, why wouldn't it be able to travel north along the same terrain?
That's precisely the point. It's not the same terrain. The location at Meetinghouse Lane is at 350 feet, give or take a few. And the location at Newton Road is 450, roughly speaking. I can look up the exact number, but it's somewhere around there.
Correct. But since this is all line of sight technology, it's not the relative height. The transmission of a radio signal will go up just as easily as it will go downhill, as long as there are no obstructions in between, correct?
The question is the obstructions. That's the key. So it will definitely, so this 118 Newton Road is kind of on the highest part of the terrain in that area, which would block any signal from propagating north.
North from Newton Road, but I'm talking about going from Meetinghouse Lane to Newton Road. I'm just taking the flip side of Newton Road projecting downhill and Meetinghouse projecting back up the same pathway. If you've got a line of sight connection, why wouldn't there be a line of sight connection going in the opposite direction?
I don't want to speculate whether there is line of sight, we're talking about fairly, an area that is, at least a mile, and I'm not sure that there is line of sight in every direction from there.
Then why would you expect the carriage of the 2100 megahertz to reach down to Meetinghouse if it doesn't have line of sight?
So signals can, it is better to have line of sight. You get stronger signal, but signals do propagate sometimes when there is no line of sight. And we did perform the CW drive test, so an actual measurement of the 2100 megahertz signal from the crane at 118 Newton Road, and that result was submitted, and it shows that there is coverage on the 114, on Meetinghouse Lane, Amity High School, all those areas that you mentioned. It actually covers more than a mile going south from 118 Newton Road. And that's because the terrain is sloping down. And so even if there are obstructions, we are, the signal can kind of bounce over the obstruction and reach some of those areas because of the higher terrain. My screen, Attorney Ainsworth seems to have maybe dropped the connection because the screen is frozen on my end.
Hi, sorry. Have I frozen for the entire panel?
No, you're back. Please continue.
Sorry about that. You didn't model 2100 megahertz from Meetinghouse, did you?
I did not.
So you have no basis to determine whether or not the 21 megahertz would actually go back uphill to Meetinghouse back uphill to Newton from Meetinghouse.
As I stated earlier, I don't want to make assumptions about what it would or would not do. I do not know.
Okay. And then just generally speaking, if you've got a wireless facility closer to a source of high demand, you're going to get a more robust signal at both, at all the frequencies, in fact. Correct?
Can you repeat the question?
Certainly.
having a wireless facility, a cell tower, closer to a source of high demand would be more desirable because it produces a stronger signal and therefore provides better service to those areas of high demand. Is that not true?
Generally speaking, it is true. However, the location we are proposing is close to the high traffic areas that we are concerned about. It's about 3/4 of a mile from the high school. And again, due to the terrain, it has line of sight to it. It covers the area around Town Hall also with a strong signal, and that is shown on the CW drive test that we submitted. It shows that it's in green, so between -85 and -95 as far as Town Hall.
But Meetinghouse would also provide coverage for all of that area as well, would it not?
It would provide coverage to the lower portion, to the southern portion around State Highway 114. But we have, we do cover that. We have, we're providing coverage and capacity for that area from our proposed location. And we're providing more coverage and, to the northern portion, north of 118 Newton Road. And also to the east and the west, as I mentioned earlier.
But generally speaking, being closer to the source of high demand is a more desirable goal, is it not?
Generally speaking, it is, and we have achieved that and achieved more coverage. So we basically have a better site from a network perspective, and there's no question in my mind about that. What we're proposing is a better site than the Meetinghouse Lane location.
Of course, there are two factors that the Siting Council considers when it's locating these facilities. One is the public need, which is essentially proxied by looking at coverage, and the other is looking at environmental compatibility. Isn't it more compatible to have a facility in an area of dense tree cover that already has an existing tower than one that currently does not?
I'm not sure Mr. Scheiban can speak to the environmental effects issues, but we do have other witnesses on the panel that can repeat some of their testimony from prior hearings as it relates to the Meetinghouse Road tower site. And I see they're still all on board here. Perhaps they could chime in. Mr. Ainsworth.
Attorney Baldwin, anybody want to respond?
This is Brian Gaudet. I can certainly speak to some of the environmental items. I'll then pass it along to Mr. Gustafson and Mr. Libertine. I think there's certainly combinations of factors that go into any sites. One of those environmental factors, above and beyond, the tree coverage, does deal with historic impacts. We've mentioned before that you are immediately adjacent to the National Register Historic District down there at the 15 Meetinghouse Lane. There are no impacts with historic properties at Newman Road. So that's certainly one thing. I'll pass it to Mr. Libertine and Mr. Gustafson for additional.
Actually, if I could just follow up on that last statement. Just being adjacent to an historic district does not necessarily assume that there's impacts to the historic district. It still requires an actual visual intersection, does it not?
It does. This is Mike Libertine with All Points Technology. Our experience is that the State Historic Preservation Office does take into account the visibility, whether it's in the district or whether it is actually visible from portions of the district. The FCC and, excuse me, the Advisory Council at a national level have established certain protocols in certain areas that are considered to be potentially affected. So it's not necessarily whether it's actually physically in the historic district. It can be adjacent to it. It can be within a half mile in the case of towers that are 200 feet or less in height. Our experience is that the SHPO, whenever there's an opportunity to place a tower that has no visual impacts whatsoever on historic resources, that would be the preferred option.
And you haven't asked SHPO to determine whether or not the Meetinghouse lane alternatives would have any impact whatsoever?
Why would we? We have no application in front of them. They would not comment on it one way or the other unless an applicant came forward. I can tell you from my 25 years of experience working with the agencies that 120
I don't want you to speculate what an agency might do.
Mr. Morris said Mr. Ainsworth asked the question. I think it should be answered.
Oh, no, I can object to the answer if the answer.
Well, let him answer it first then.
Go ahead, Mr. Libertine, please continue. I'd like to hear the answer myself.
I was just going to state that in the experience we have had working with Verizon and all the carriers in the state of Connecticut, that based on experience, that a tower placed within the area of potential effect, which in this case is within a half a mile of a historic district or a resource, that 120 or 150 foot tower would certainly be looked at by the SHPO as something that they would have some concerns with, and there would certainly be some discussions. I can't say whether or not they would approve or disapprove of the tower, but we've had several applications in front of the council where we've had this very issue where we've either had to move towers to other locations, we've had to mitigate significantly. So again, I just believe that in this case, this would not be something that they would allow unequivocally.
Thank you, Mr. Libertine. This topic has been discussed in previous hearings and is not part of the late filed exhibits. So Attorney Ainsworth, if you could move off the topic and move on to something else, I would appreciate it. Thank you, Attorney Ainsworth.
One moment.
Thank you.
I'm just going to take a look. I may be coming to an end, so if you give me a moment, though. Just want to review my notes.
Good one. Thank you.
Actually, with that, I actually have concluded my cross-examination. We've covered the topics that I've been allowed to cover.
Thank you, Attorney Ainsworth. We will now continue with cross-examination of the applicant by Mark and Michelle Greengard. Mr. and Mrs. Greengard, you may proceed.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My first question is for Mr. Scheiban. You had stated that 118 Newton Road is not your ideal location. And I'd like to know if that's true, why Verizon hasn't performed a CW test at the 15 Meetinghouse Lane to see if it would have a comparable or better reading.
So we were initially looking closer to the intersection of Route 63 and 67. We were not successful in finding property that is suitable and where they're willing to work with us on this, and that's why we shifted a little bit to the south, which ended up at 118 Newton Road. As I stated earlier, the ground elevation at 118 Newton Road is about 100 feet higher than Meetinghouse Lane. It is closer to our objective, which is the 60 portions of the 67 and the 63, and from a capacity perspective, the way we can distribute the traffic among the three sectors of the south side works out better at 118 Newton Road. So there is no doubt in my mind that from a network perspective, that was the better location. It is not ideal. We rarely, if ever, get the ideal location that we seek, but it is a good location. And it was, vastly superior to Meetinghouse Lane. So we did not conduct a drive test there. We conducted a drive test at Newton Road because we dropped the height. Initially, we were aiming for 140 feet. And I needed to make sure that if we dropped it to 100 to minimize the visual impact, that we would still get most of our objective covered.
But I think what I understood you to say is that the results of a CW test were more accurate. And if you're going to spend between $400,000 and $500,000 to build this tower, which you said mostly comes from your customers' money, wouldn't it be prudent to at least do the test to see what the results are if they're similar? So you can have a site that has less impact, has town support, and possibly can be cheaper to build?
Mr. Morissette, I'm going to object to the question. First of all, Mr. Shaban has answered the question, but more importantly, again, there is not a tower site proposed at 15 or 4 Meetinghouse Lane that is currently before the council.
Thank you, Attorney Baldwin. Yes, the tower that is on the plate for the council to deliberate over is at the Newton Road site. So the question is irrelevant. Please continue.
Okay. My next question is for Mr. Libertine. You stated in your earlier testimony that your group was listening to neighbors' concerns, and because of those concerns, you lowered the tower height. Isn't that correct?
We did, in fact, lower the height as part of the consultation process with the town and hearing the neighbors' concerns. That's correct.
Okay, so my question is this. If Verizon is truly listening to the neighbors' concerns, why then wouldn't you use the existing driveway at 118 Newton Road, which you said was feasible, and that would eliminate the traffic, noise, be safer for children and adults to walk, play, ride bikes, play ball on the Soundview Drive cul-de-sac?
We would be willing to use it. I believe that the landowner is not allowing us to do that and would prefer us to come in from the cul-de-sac. So it's a landlord issue and not necessarily a Verizon issue.
Okay. And is the landlord not willing to do that because they're going to be inconvenienced?
I can't speak to that. I've not had any contact with the landlord.
Okay. So if the council was to approve your application, but made it a condition to use the existing driveway, would you still be able to build your tower?
Using the existing driveway?
Yes, if that,
so, sure.
Yes. So if that was a condition of the approval, you'd still be able to do it?
We could physically do it and engineer it and build it. Again, I can't speak to the landlords allowing us to do that or not.
But it would be feasible?
Yes.
First, I have one correction on document September 14th, late filed exhibit responses of Selco Partnership. Under the section where you do have the listing of all of the towers nearby, the address listed for Woodbridge North 2, ironically, is listed as 118 Soundview Drive, not 118 Newton Road. In terms of a question, with reference to the proposed revised location of the tower at the 118 Newton Road site, Mr. Gaudet admitted that it would be more visible just by virtue of it being closer to Soundview Drive and the cul-de-sac there. And it should be noted there are no heavy line of trees like there is somewhat more on the southern side. And the brush that was mentioned during the conversation is on the northern side, and it's very low, rather negligible. So the tower would be definitely more visible, and the area we're speaking of is a very open field. What is the reasoning behind making it equidistant when there's a distance, a difference between the distance from property lines versus proximity to the homes on those properties themselves?
Ms. Greengard and Mr. Morris, if I could just point out that the response that Ms. Greengard is referring to was a response to a question from the Siting Council, who asked the applicant if they could relocate the tower to a spot on the property equidistant from the property lines. That's all the applicant was responding to. And I think if Mr. Gaudet wants to reiterate, I think his testimony in a later proceeding was a little bit different than the testimony Ms. Greengard is referring to, and he can speak to that. But again, that was a direct question from the council, which is why we responded to that interrogatory in the way we did. Mr. Gaudet.
Thank you, Attorney Baldwin. Yes, Mr. Gaudet, if you could try to provide Mrs. Greengarden with some clarity, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Of course. Yeah, so there was some misunderstanding between Mr. Morissette and myself when we were discussing where to shift that tower. So if the shift would take it essentially farther east on the property, as I understood, as opposed to initially in the response you just provided, I was imagining it shifting just straight north on the property. So a shift to the east and north into the property would reduce visibility. I don't know how substantially, but would reduce the visibility, at least from the street of Soundview Drive. I'm not sure that the nature of the intervening vegetation between any properties along that northern parcel line, but there certainly is vegetation there currently, and I do believe that shift to the east and into the property would reduce the visibility on Soundview.
I would tend to disagree only because I see it, and it's a disadvantage that nobody else is seeing it, but that there are much fewer trees on that northern side than elsewhere. So I think that's something that needs to be understood. As a follow-up, the noise from the generator, as well as the floodlight, would also be more imposing and have a bigger impact on the close by homeowners because of that move. Isn't that true?
Ms. Greengarden, can I ask what floodlight you're referring to?
It was in your application as part of the materials that were going to be on the tower. I think it was also alluded to with Mr. Bemby at some point.
Okay, Mr. Bemby, can you speak to those two issues? First, regarding the security light over that may or may not exist at the equipment.
I will also tell you on page 16 of the June 30th responses to the Siting Council, it's mentioned about the generator there.
Mr. Bemby?
Yeah, so the generator is actually going to be covered with a south attenuating cover, which will pretty much lower the sound. It'll be the sound equal to people having a conversation, and that's how loud it would be. And then as far as the light goes, that's actually a work light. And it only goes on when the technician is on the site doing some work, and it's on a timer, in the sense that, you know, once he's left the site, the light will go off. So it is not something that isn't going to be intrusive.
Okay. Just also to clarify, on that site, on the page 16, as I was referring to in responses, it talks about the dBA when the generator is on is at 51.6 dBA, when allowable at night from the town of Woodbridge is 51. It might not sound like a lot, but it is over the amount.
So the generator will only be tested. This sound you're talking about is only during tests, and those only take place during the daytime.
Okay. Okay. And why weren't any simulations done on the revised site, you know, on that property, or scenic impact analysis done on that area?
You're talking about
I don't know if it's you, Mr. Bemby. I'm sorry. I don't know if it's Mr. Gaudet. I don't know who it would be who can answer that, but
Probably it's Mr. Gaudet or Mr. Libertine.
Yeah, and I just want to make sure I understand. You're referring to that shifted location that we just spoke about?
yes.
We have not gone out and performed a balloon float there for that shifted location.
Or any type of scenic impact analysis either.
We have not. It is a very minor shift in location. I don't expect a significant change, certainly to the predicted view shed mapping that we do or the overall visibility.
But without the simulations, you really can't tell, can you?
You say it's minor, but yet you're also saying that it wouldn't be as visible because of where it's being moved to. So I'm getting confused.
For one specific location, that being shielded by the trees is referencing only Soundview Drive.
If I might try to clarify, again, the comments that were made previous were in response to one of the council's questions. So it was a specific location and view line that was being addressed at that time. I think it's fair to say that that shift, minor as it is, could have some difference on the areas immediately around the property itself. I think what Mr. Gaudet was trying to explain was that in the grand scheme of things, in terms of the overall visibility, would not have a substantial difference in what has been shown. But certainly that shift would have some changes would occur compared to where we are proposing today if you were standing within a few hundred feet of the property.
That's correct. Okay. Back to Mr. Bemby, if you will. You said in testimony that some trees would be removed on the 118 Newton Road proposal. And again, it's a very open field. So can you tell us how many trees you're thinking will be removed and where those are?
Let me just pull up the plan. So there are actually 3 trees that will be removed that are the size of 10 inches in diameter. So minimal clearance, just 3 trees.
And again,
just the site itself.
And this is the proposed site, not the relocated site, Mr. Bemby?
Not the relocated site, the proposed site.
The proposed site. Okay, I didn't understand that to be the case. Okay, thank you for clarifying that. I was struck by a question Mr. Baldwin had asked of Mr. Smook in reference to the 15 Meetinghouse location when he asked him, did you knock on any doors of neighbors who live around the Meetinghouse Lane area to ask them if they would object to a tower at the Public Works site? So I'd like to ask the same thing of Verizon, whether or not they knocked on any doors of the neighbors who live on Soundview or Newton Road or Forest Glen or Orchard Street or any of our surrounding neighborhoods around here?
I can answer that. We did not, but we had a public process in which everyone was made aware of what was going on.
You're right, except the question that Mr. Baldwin asked was, did anyone knock on doors to see if anyone objected? That wasn't the same case here. You know, they had the idea of going to a hearing, perhaps they spoke for or against it, but it wasn't that it was conducted house by house to see beforehand how people would feel.
That's true, and that's fair. But okay. I do believe there's a distinction, but that's fine.
Okay. Hypothetically speaking, if the Supremes had said no, or if this application might get denied, or if it were to be appealed and then possibly denied there, what would Verizon do? Do you have a plan B or next step, so to speak?
Mrs. Morissette, I'm going to object to the question. We're not going to speculate on what may happen if other things happen in advance of that. So Verizon will reevaluate. I think that's the best any of our witnesses could say.
I agree, Attorney Baldwin. Mr. and Mrs. Greengard, the hearing today is limited to the late filed exhibits filed on August 17th. I am allowing you quite a bit of leeway in your questioning, and I will allow some more questionings by you.
I appreciate that. I appreciate that.
Please keep in mind that this is associated with the late files exhibits filed on August 17th. So please continue.
Okay, I have only one more question, and I'm sorry, because we were told that we could reflect on some of the other things that were presented, but so I'm sorry, but in our mind, it appears you've changed things several times, and we tried very hard to keep up with those changes and jumping through all the hoops, and we acknowledge that there is a need for the purported tower in Woodbridge, and did our due diligence and try to find a viable alternative, try to compare apples with apples that was suggested by many of the council members. And with your own team admitting that 118 is not an ideal location anyway, if you were to pause and really wanted to choose the site, which one of the council members even said, and I quote, provide the best benefit and least impact, and for the sake of good customer relations, doesn't 15 Meetinghouse Lane meet that definition for so many reasons, including having so much support, and especially when it's a site that is 500 feet or more away from the nearest residence and on town property, and that area being heavily dense? Again, I know that's.
Let me start by objecting to a lot of the characterizations that were just made about what our witnesses stated about the application and the proposed site. But with that said, perhaps Mr. Shiban, you can talk once again about 118 and the Meetinghouse Road alternatives, just to kind of sum it all up.
Thank you, Attorney Baldwin. Mr. Shiban.
Okay, so I mean, we did say we didn't get the ideal location, and as I mentioned earlier, this is typically this happens quite often. We're not trying to make the perfect the enemy of the good. So we got a good site. It achieves a very good portion of what we set out to do. And as I stated earlier, in my mind, there is no question that it's a better site from a network, from a coverage, and from a capacity perspective. 118 Newton Road is better than the 15 Meetinghouse Lane, and it also the drive test and the plots that were submitted by Isotrope for 15 Meetinghouse Lane were based on a 150-foot tower. We're actually proposing a 100-foot tower. So we think that we have, I was at the public information meeting with the residents, and we took their feedback. We basically are trying to achieve some compromise, and that's why we dropped the height of that proposed tower. And I believe that we did propose a good compromise, which would meet our network needs and our customers' needs, and try to minimize the visual impact as much as we could.
Thank you, Mr. Shiban.
I have no more questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. and Mrs. Greengard. Thank you for your questions. At this point, we will take a 11-minute break and return at 3:45. We'll see you then. So thank you very much. We'll see you at 3:45. Very good. Thank you, everyone. We are back on the record. Is the court reporter back with us?
I am here, back on the record.
Great. Thank you very much. We will now continue with cross-examination of the applicant by the town of Woodbridge. And I believe Attorney Bloom is going to be cross-examining.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You can hear me right, I guess?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Yes, Ira Bloom for the town of Woodbridge. The town has no questions. Thank you.
Excuse me. I had to turn myself off mute. We'll now continue with cross-examination of the applicant by the council, starting with Mr. Mercier. Mr. Mercier.
I have no questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mercier. We'll continue with cross-examination by Mr. Edelson, followed by Mr. Silvestri. Mr. Edelson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morissette. So this is a question to the Verizon representatives. Towards the end of our last hearing, there was some discussion regarding Public Act 19-163, which is regarding the deployment of 5G wireless. And I'm wondering, has anybody from Verizon been notified or has found out that the town of Woodbridge made inquiries to the Department of Transportation with regard to using the rights of way within Woodbridge for the location of a small cell tower? Or small cell antenna, I should say.
This is Tim Parks of Verizon. I have not heard of anything about that.
And I assume from looking at faces, no one else has heard that the town pursued getting the Department of Transportation involved. So I'll take that as a no. I guess my next question is for Mr. Chaiban. It was a little hard, I must confess, for me to follow some of Attorney Ainsworth's questions regarding the surrounding towers. But from your perspective, did any of that change your sense of what the needs are in this area and the coverage that you're trying to achieve?
No, as I mentioned earlier, we are constantly upgrading our existing sites with, in this case, we change the kind of radios and we add capacity. But the fundamental need for coverage and in that area, in the Woodbridge North 2 area, has not changed.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Morissette, those were my only questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Edelson. We'll now continue with cross-examination by Mr. Silvestri, followed by Mr. Nguyen. Mr. Silvestri.
Thank you, Mr. Morissette. Mr. Chaiban, I wanted to go back to that September 14th, 2021 late file. The multi-band antennae, is it just the SBNHH, the X7C, and the JAHH, or are there more?
Mr. Silvestri, there's also a model that starts with MX, which is also a multi-band antenna.
All right, but the LNX, the HBXX, BXA, et cetera, those are not multi, correct?
These are, they are typically used for closely related bands. So the BXA, for example, can serve 700 megahertz and 850 megahertz. The LNX, similarly, 700 and 850 megahertz. And the HBXX can serve 2100 and 1900, which are also called AWS and PCS.
Okay, so the three I mentioned, you just responded that they could serve two bands, if you will. What is your definition on multi-band? Is it three or more, or?
I mean, strictly speaking, you could say they're all multi-band, but the difference is, there's a much bigger difference between 700 megahertz and 2100 megahertz than there is between 700 and 850. And so the ones that we called multi-band in the discussion with Attorney Ainsworth are the ones that cover 700, 850, 1900, and 2100. So they cover the four commonly deployed bands that we have.
Okay, so if I understand correctly, your explanation of multi-band would be those four bands. The other ones we mentioned, the LNX, HBXX, are 2 or less.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Then Attorney Baldwin, you might object to this, but I'm going to pose the question anyhow, because Mr. Greengarden started going where I wanted to go, but I didn't quite hear the answer. So let me start off that I think we're all in agreement that the drive tests are more accurate than propagation plots. Would that be correct again, Mr. Chaman?
Yes, it is.
Okay, thank you. Then when we're looking at the filing that Verizon had for Meetinghouse at 140 feet, we had propagation plots that were provided. And that was in the late file from, I believe, September 14th. The related question I had on that is that if Verizon did provide those propagation plots, why not the drive test?
There's a couple of reasons. One was, practical. In order to do the drive test, we need to get permission from the town, and we had, we did not have that much time. The other thing is the cost. So basically, we would need to get a crane out there, rent a crane, and get a crew to do the testing for us. And so it was a combination of these two factors that, that were the reasons that we did not do the CW test there.
But while I don't object, Mr. Silvestri, I can also add that the propagation plots were provided because that's what the council asked us to do. The council did not ask us to do drive test out there.
Understood. Thank you, Attorney Baldwin. Thank you, Mr. Jaban. Mr. Morissette, that's all I have. And thank you as well.
Thank you, Mr. Silvestri. We now continue with cross-examination by Mr. Nguyen, followed by Ms. Cooley. Mr. Nguyen.
Mr. Morissette, I do not have any questions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Nguyen. We'll now continue with cross-examination by Ms. Cooley, followed by Mr. Lynch. Ms. Cooley. Thank you. We will continue with cross-examination by Mr. Lynch. Mr. Lynch.
I have no questions, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Lynch. I have a follow-up question, and I believe it's for Mr. Shiban. It has to do with the accuracy of a drive test versus the propagation. Is there a methodology or a measure of the range of errors between the two? Was one plus or minus 5%?
Yes, it is, roughly speaking. So let me kind of first explain in give an analogy. So if you remember when there's a hurricane, they show the location where the hurricane currently is, and then they show a cone of the possibility where it could go. And then once it actually is over, they will plot the actual path of that, the eye of the hurricane. And so this is similar, is that the computer modeling is kind of similar to the cone, and the CW drive test is actually the actual path. Well, but to answer your question directly, the error is typically on the order of 10 dBs. So 8 to 10 dBs. So it's, yes.
8 to 10 dBs for the propagation or the drive test?
Between the propagation and the drive test. So, I mean, the propagation can be off by a factor of 8 to 10 dBs, whereas the drive test is an actual measurement.
Okay, so is it safe to say that the drive test, because it's an actual measurement, there is no error in the measurement? Or is there still you must have some error in it?
Sure. So any measurement will have an error. It's just that the error is a lot smaller in magnitude. It's not 8 to 10 dB. It basically will depend on the accuracy of the equipment, and it will be significantly less than 1 dB. It's a pretty small error.
Very good. Well, that's helpful. Thank you for your response. That's all I had as well. So that pretty much wraps it up. We will, before closing the evidentiary record in this matter, the citing council announces that briefs and proposed findings of fact may be filed with the council by any party or intervener no later than November 18th, 2021. The submission of briefs or proposed findings of fact are not required by this council. Rather, we leave this choice to the parties or interveners. Anyone who has not become a party or intervener, but who desires to make his or her views known to the council may file written statements to the council within 30 days of the date hereof. The council will issue draft findings of fact, and thereafter parties and interveners may identify errors or inconsistencies between the council's draft findings of fact and the record. However, no new information, no new evidence, no new arguments, and no reply briefs without permission will be considered by the council. I hereby declare this hearing adjourned, and thank you everyone for your participation. Good evening.
Thank you.
Radio 4.